You have been playing the first Fallout game for a while, and you have noticed that there are some very strange creatures in the wastelands. This makes you wonder, how did the Floaters and Centaurs come to be? Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. Today we are going to be discussing the Master's pets. How did they happen? Let me know in the comments who you think would win in a fight, a floater or a centaur. We are first going to begin with the floater. To get an idea about the floater's origins, we must first start with where we often find them. The floaters are a worm-like creature that are often encountered around the Mariposa military base, as well as close to the Master's lair. This is in part due to them being the Master's pets or creations, as without him, we would not have these creatures. To get an idea of the creatures of origin of a floater and what could have caused it to exist, we should first examine the anatomy of a floater. When we look at the vats, we can see several interesting components to this strange worm-like creature. The floater has a ganglion, which is what we would consider the brain. The floaters are not known to be intelligent beings, but are known to be aggressive. However, they are able to tell apart friend and foe. We can also see something called the flotation sacs. Considering we are not in the middle of a children's swimming pool, they are not used for keeping their strange and enlarged head above water. No, these flotation sacs are filled with a noxious gas that helps to keep its head up. This gas is highly flammable, so if you hit it with something like a flamer, there is a chance you will get a flambéed floater. Anyway, back to the anatomy. So floaters have a giant toothy mouth which their tongue comes out of. This tongue at the end separates into four, kind of like a cross between the tongue from the xenomorph aliens and a cursed four-leaf clover. We also see something called the ovipositor when we look at these creatures. This gives us a hint as to some of the creatures it could originate from. This is due to all floaters having ovipositors. This suggests that every floater has egg-laying capability. Then there is just the rest of the long body, which is thin and kind of flat. So what are the most likely creatures of origins for floaters? Floaters are most likely a combination of different types of flatworms. The main two families of flatworms that are important in this specifically are the planarian flatworms and the tapeworms. If we break down the anatomy whilst looking at it with these different creatures, we can see where if they were combined we would potentially get floaters from. So with the mouth of a floater, it looks somewhat like the head of a tapeworm, the part called the scolex. This is the part that has the hooks that attach. Another characteristic that makes it likely to be from the tapeworm family is the presence of ovipositors on all floaters. Why is the ovipositor interesting? Well, this means there is no specifically male or female floaters. They are technically both. All floaters have the ability to lay eggs. This is also true for tapeworms, as tapeworms possess the capability to reproduce without another tapeworm being present. However, tapeworms, due to their parasitic nature, need a host. So this is where the planarian worms would come in, specifically hammerhead worms, as varieties of these are found in California. This is where it gets interesting. So hammerhead worms have an interesting hunting technique. These creatures secrete a toxin known as tetrodotoxin on their skin. This is a neurotoxin that you may have heard about from pufferfish that causes something called fugu poisoning, due to the fish being known as fugu in Japanese when you eat this type of sushi, if it is prepared incorrectly. Most of the time, this type of poisoning in humans does come from ingestion. However, it can be caused by exposure through nicks and cuts, which was evident in the 2006 case of an aquarium worker doing a necropsy on a porcupine fish who had passed away in the aquarium. So the aquarium worker had nicked themselves on the fish and had mild symptoms of tetrodotoxin poisoning. So floaters should realistically give some form of poison damage during fights, but they do not, hinting that they are a cross between tapeworms, which are parasitic and non-toxic, and hammerhead worms, which have neurotoxins but are not parasitic. So they are able to survive without a host. The hammerhead worm DNA gives it the ability to survive outside of a host's body, but the tapeworm DNA neutralizes its toxicity. In other Fallout games, there are floaters that do have the ability to poison you, but they are not what we are discussing today. We are purely talking about the floaters from the first Fallout game. Another reason why these two creatures combined most likely make up the floater is if you look at the size of a hammerhead worm, which is between 8 to 15 inches or 20 to 38 centimeters, they are much smaller than a floater in the game. Whereas if you look at a tapeworm, they are much larger, normally between 4 to 12 meters or 13 to 39 feet. A floater is in between the size of these two, so this would give it some of the size necessary to make it able to survive in the wasteland. With floaters, there is no, this is the exact animal they originated from, here is their experiment. However, there was a disc talking about experiments on flatworms back in May 2075, specifically them being infected with the forced evolutionary virus. However, this is where the trail runs somewhat cold, as the floaters are not mentioned by name on the disc, nor does it specifically say what the flatworms become. Based on the similarities, it is likely that the floaters were a creature left at the base as an old experiment that was further experimented on by the Master. With potential genetic experiments to combine several species of flatworms in the pre-war experiments and used forced evolutionary virus on the result, this may have been further improved upon by the Master, as in his secret base, they are referred to as his pets. The floaters are also often depicted with the centaurs and super mutants when found in random encounters outside of the base. These creatures have an abnormal kinship with each other, as most of the time in the wasteland you will find creatures that are of different species attacking each other on random encounters, rather than sticking together. However, centaurs and floaters stick together. This hints that the floaters may have been part of the Master's experiments due to their lack of aggression towards the others that the Master experimented on. So the floaters are most likely a result of both pre-war activities and the Master's own experiments. So as a little bonus, looking at our current science, could floaters happen? A creature that would be remotely similar occurring in any sense would take much genetic editing. We currently only have the ability to edit up to 7 genes at a time when it comes to genetic modifications through CRISPR-Cas9. CRISPR-Cas9 is a type of gene editing that uses a modified guide piece of RNA to find the target DNA. This allows the segment to be cut and edited. RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. To get a creature like a floater, we would need to be able to edit many more genes than just 7 at a time. Considering the creatures that a floater comes from are related, although distantly, they may be one of the easier, bizarre Fallout creatures to recreate. However, there would need to be an expanded ability to gene edit, and it would also not look the same due to various features like that weird tongue thing not being present in any type of flatworm. Now we are going to move to another of the Master's creations, the Centaur. This is that 2-headed creature that walks around on 6 human arms. The centaur is essentially Fallout's version of a chimera. This creature seems to be inspired by the creature from the 1982 film The Thing. If you've seen it, it's a great film. If not, the premise is an alien species that is essentially taking over the bodies of scientists and animals in an Antarctic base, causing a mass that looks like the centaur in the first and second Fallout games. If you look at the vats of a centaur from Fallout 1, it is a 2-headed creature with 6 arms that it walks around on. The 2 heads, one being human, another being a dog, both heads seem to be capable of individual thought, which is why we see the dog head will occasionally snap at the human head. These heads are attached to elongated necks. These elongated necks then join into a muscular torso which has 6 arms coming out of it. At the other end, there is tentacles that also come out of it. So what are the most likely creatures of origins for the centaur? Centaurs come from the curiosity of the Master, his experiments on other creatures dipping them into the forced evolutionary virus vat. These centaurs more specifically come from the experiment of adding in a variety of animals into the forced evolutionary virus vat all at the same time. These animals included humans, dogs, and cats, as well as others he found around the base. These were added in at the same time to get the centaur. The centaur in most cases looks to be primarily a mix of human and dog parts, with most of it being human. The only real evidence of another animal is the dog head and perhaps the tentacles that come out of the back end of the centaur. So these creatures in most cases in the first Fallout game are mostly a combination of a dog and humans. Before we move on, a quick little tidbit of information. If you played Fallout 2 and remember Mum's Diner in the den, if you look at the Vault Dweller's official cookbook, one of the dishes coming from the diner is centaur chops. The dish you also deliver to Smitty is said to be a combination plate of the best darn food she has, so this may also be centaur. However, as the chosen one, you can only really order rat dishes from her, so it must be a status thing. With the centaurs being caused by an interaction of the forced evolutionary virus that has caused them to merge into a post-apocalyptic chimera, a quick rundown on the forced evolutionary virus. This virus is a modified version of the megavirus. The megaviruses are a family of viruses that are the largest known viruses. Some of them have a higher heat resistance than human cells. When it comes to the human part of the creature, we need to talk about something called the wet bulb globe temperature. This was a formula created by the US government and takes into account the humidity, temperature, and wind speed. Essentially, this formula is about what a human body could withstand temperature-wise. Based on this theory, the safe temperature for humans for prolonged periods is below 35 degrees Celsius, which is 95 degrees Fahrenheit, due to temperature regulation through the skin, and humidity below 100 for prolonged periods of times. Yes, I know that sounds like a low temperature, but prolonged exposure to higher temperatures can cause damage. And the higher it goes, the more likely you are to have organ failure and heat stroke, as well as death. There is another reason why this is important. Human fat tissue or adipose tissue has a low melting point of only around 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, especially with prolonged exposure. Why is this important? Well, the forced evolutionary virus fat looks to be bubbling or boiling, which means the human cells would be much more sensitive to these temperatures than the viral cells. This would mean that the humans would be more able to merge with the creature they were thrown in with, and also because the temperature being higher, the DNA would be more likely to uncoil and separate from its normal two-stranded double helix design, allowing the virus better access to the DNA to make those changes. This is the most likely in-game explanation for how the centaur formation could work. The temperature of the vat is slightly higher than safe for both humans and dogs, however low enough for the virus to still be stable. It would probably be around the temperature of fat melting based on the muscle still looking intact. The virus gets into the cells due to the heat damage and causes the changes as the DNA has unraveled due to heat. And the creature merged together due to the melting and then cooling, causing them to stick together when they come out of the vat. Looking at the science of today, could a centaur from the first Fallout game happen? Let's first start with the virus component. There is a specific type of megavirus called mimivirus. This virus has a similar immune defense system to CRISPR. This is called mimivir. Essentially what it does is it remembers previously encountered virophages and cuts up their DNA when it encounters them. If you edit the megavirus FEV, then you could cause it to make the mutations you wanted through this. So in theory, this could work like CRISPR with more research and more advanced technology doing gene editing. Now, could the two creatures merge into one? No. Due to many differences between dogs and humans, they would not be able to merge as easily as Fallout makes it look. There is actually several issues with this, such as humans and dogs having different numbers of chromosomes. There's also the differences in blood type compatibility. Yes, dogs also have different blood types. Cross-species donation is not safe, so the merging systems would mean there would be a lack of compatibility. This would lead to the immune systems attacking the foreign bodies. So to summarize, how did these creatures happen? Well, to start with the floaters, they are likely a result of genetic experiments and forced evolution virus exposure in the pre-war era, with tapes from 2075 claiming experiments on flatworms. This is most likely their beginning. They were also most likely further experimented on by the Master, which is why they see his other creatures as friends rather than foes. This creature is most likely a mix of two types of flatworms, the tapeworm and a type of planarian worm called a hammerhead worm, giving its ability to survive outside of a host and also providing it with the ability to lay eggs. The centaur, however, was created through the Master's experiments, throwing multiple creatures into the forced evolutionary virus vat and seeing what sticks. These mostly being dogs and humans from what the centaur looks like. This creature was not created through any high-tech or pre-war experiment, it was the Master's curiosity. If you enjoyed this video and want to know more about the Master, then you should check out this video.